Welcome back to the Rational Educator Podcast. On today's show, we're going to discuss some practical and hopefully actionable steps for parents whose children are in schools that aren't working. What are the alternatives? Does it make any difference to show up at the school board and make a stink? Are private schools an option? What about homeschooling? We'll cover all these questions and more on this episode of the Rational Educator Podcast. If you like what you're hearing from us, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss an episode. Email us over at info@rationaleducator.com. Here's the episode. We are back with our roundtable experts, Doctors Andrew Bernstein and Deanna Heikkinen. Hi guys, how are you doing today?
Doing well.
I'm grooving, Joel. We're not only back, but we're going to keep coming back. Right? Because this is the most fundamental topic of all, education.
The issue that we want to talk about today is about action and alternatives. So if you are a parent and you don't like what's happening in your child's school, what can you do about it? So the first thing that we want to ask is, can you make change from within? Can you approach your local school board and demand action? We see this happening all over the country. We see parents storming school board meetings and demanding change. And naturally, we see reciprocal backlash against that after we've found out that the Department of Justice, led by Merrick Garland, is instructing the FBI to investigate threats to the school board. But be that as it may, what can addressing the school board do? Are they open to change? And Deanna, let's start with you.
I think, first off, it's a really regional question. The founding fathers left education up to the states purposely, and that's a whole other episode. We can get into the reasons behind it and, sort of the politics in education from the founding on forward. That's probably many episodes. But there are some places in the country where certain things seem to be a little bit better. In fact, I had a conversation with a good friend of mine this morning, and she's up in Montana, and I was talking to her about some things that other people I know are going through in places like Seattle, and the curriculum that's being taught and things that the kids are being sort of introduced to or forced to do certain things. And she said that's not happening up there. So first off, I think that it tends to be a regional problem. And again, last episode, we talked about textbook companies and how that's regional. And so education, there's a lot of different regions and what's happening. But in general, the school boards, there's a couple interesting things about school boards. One is that for some people that are on the school board, they see it as a stepping stone to a political career. So it's sort of that entry level position in order if they want to move up in politics. And so some people are there for very different reasons, not necessarily for the kids, but for their own interest. And so a lot of people that are on the school boards are going to go with sort of the flow, what the teachers want, what the principals want. They don't want to go against them because they're the experts. And so, and as we talked about last time, those teachers and principals are coming out of teachers' colleges and educational leadership programs within the schools of education. And so there's, I don't think that, storming the school board, yeah, it seems like an effective thing and maybe they can vote, but they don't have full range over what is being taught in the classroom. Now they can adopt curriculum that they can push off to the district. For instance, in Seattle, BLM curriculum was pushed off to the district, but they're also the principals and the individual teachers have some sort of power on what they want to be taught in their schools and their classrooms. So it's not that the school boards completely dictate everything. Now, it is a public forum for parents to voice their issues. And that is a good thing, because if enough parents do it, it might kind of trickle down, and they might, if it gets high profile enough, and these people on the school board want a higher political career, they're going to kind of want to toe the line. And so it's really a mixed bag, but I don't think it's going to be overall 100% effective. I don't even know how effective it can be.
So so the way you characterize it, it sounds like school boards are really in a position of more of an advise and consent relationship, to where the real decisions are made within the school administration and the teachers. And if they're coming from the teachers' colleges, that sounds like an ideological battle. So Andy, what is it about the ideology behind the administration and the teachers that make them so steadfast and zealous, as if they're guarding the towers?
Well, it's an open secret that the philosophic left has complete control over the teachers' colleges, over the humanities divisions of our universities, over the government school system. And their interest is not to educate the kids, but to indoctrinate the kids with leftist dogma. It's fascinating, because 100 years ago, the religious conservatives were menaced education. They banned the teaching of evolution and, in a number of Bible Belt states. And maybe there's still some of them that want to do that. I don't know. I haven't heard much from them lately. But the left has won the culture wars, and they completely, they're ongoing, but right now they're way ahead. They control the universities, and they control the government school system. And they do not want parents dissenting to leftist dogma. And you saw Terry McAuliffe say recently that parents, I don't remember his exact quote, but parents should not be telling the school system what they should teach their children.
Terry McAuliffe, governor of Virginia.
Yes, and a former Clinton apparatchik, as I recall. Yes, he's telling the parents should not be telling the schools what to teach their children. Go, what? That is just a jaw-dropping comment, and I'm going to have a lot more to say about that as we proceed on this show. But you're dealing with leftist ideology. They're hardcore Marxists. Some of them may be overt communists. They will fight to the death, and I mean this literally, no hyperbole. They will die sooner than give up their power to stunt students' minds.
Every time
the goal of schooling is not to educate the kids; it's to indoctrinate them with leftist orthodoxy. Man-made warming, critical race theory. America's a land of systemic racism. White people are all racist. That's what they're interested in. They'll never give up that power.
And this is explicit in the curriculum that's being taught at the teachers' colleges. Deanna, can you confirm?
Absolutely. I had a class on diversity of education, and I kept on wanting to talk about the diversity of ideas, and I was told that didn't matter. And it was more about skin color or gender or sexual orientation. Those are the things that mattered. And I kept on asking, but we are all about education, and that is most primary about educating the mind and expanding the mind. And it doesn't matter. And so I wasn't very popular in my program, but, it was at times very difficult, but at times also very fun. I've never been sort of like major contrarian in a room. So that was an interesting experience.
Well, every time we see the stories like this pop up, it seems never ending. It's you think as parents get outraged and you think you might have raised up enough of a stink to stop it in one place, 3 more pop up somewhere else, like the Hydra. You want to just go to one of these school board meetings and say Hail Hydra sometime. But so since it's a never-ending well of Marxist ideology and indoctrination, Is it possible to have an alternative in private schools? What if parents just got their kids out of the public schools? Are private schools any better? What do you have to say about that, Deanna?
Well, again, it's really a mixed bag, but what I'm seeing and what, particularly being a private tutor, I've really encountered a lot of students who are in private school as well as public school, and even some that are homeschooled. And what I'm seeing are even the private schools and some, high schools, $20,000 a year, and they're secular. So it's not, a Catholic or a Christian private school. It's just a really good private school or a prep school that sort of prepares them for college. And the same types of curriculum are being taught. Students are still asked to go stand on a line in what's called the privilege walk, which I think is a public shaming. It's really no different than having the stocks and having people throw cabbage at your head.
Wait,
It's
hang on a
actually
second.
probably
Let's talk
worse.
about the public shaming practices, and they come in several different forms. But give us an example. Parents often want to just send their kids to school, and the best ones will ask questions. What did you learn in school today? But they don't always hear really truly what's happening, especially if their children are experiencing shame by the teachers. So what is a privilege walk?
So the privilege walk is, and this was developed, oh gosh, almost a decade now, I guess, maybe less, but probably maybe even over a decade. And this is it's a series of questions, and there are different ones, and it's evolved and it's under different names, but it's all basically the same thing. And you line all the students up on a line, and this is done from college all the way down to elementary school. And in fact, when I was teaching college, they had the faculty on opening day do the privilege walk at my college, and I just didn't do it. I went up to my office and prepped for my classes because for me that was a better use of my time. But you line up all the students on a line, and then you'll read statements such as, if you had books in your home while you were growing up, take a step forward. If you didn't, take a step backwards. If you ever went to bed hungry, take a step forward, take a step backward. And so basically, and the way the questions are written, you're going to have theoretically, your white males at the front and anybody of color in the back. And so you're both shaming the white males for being privileged and pointing out that they have these sort of unearned advantages in life and all of these things. And then all the people of color are victims. So you have the oppressor and you have the oppressed. And I don't know, funny, being a historian, sounds a little bit like Marxism to me, where everybody is either in two camps. There's no gray area. And it is a vile thing to do on so many levels, but it is abusive, because you're either going to get students comfortable with lying because they don't want to be truthful because of shame. You're publicly shaming in front of their peers. And then after this exercise, there's a debriefing period where everybody gets to talk about their feelings and how they felt. And it's this sort of lovely, open kumbaya, but it is really a horrible thing. And think about first graders, that impact. Think about high school kids in front of all their peers. And high school is hard enough. It was hard enough for me in the 80s. It is a million times harder now with social media. And it is this exercise I get so upset about. In fact, I have a good friend of mine whose son's school, private school, they were going to be doing a similar exercise. And I was talking to him about it and really the horrors of this. And it's just, these are the things that are happening. And I don't know how much parents know about it. The school system we have is you drop your kids off early in the morning, and then they come back in the afternoon or sometimes the evening if they're doing after school programs. You don't have to think for 10 hours, 8 hours about your kids. Okay, I get it. People are working jobs. There's a lot going on. We're very busy. The economy, it's difficult. Things are getting more expensive, all of those things. But the norm is now parents don't have to think about their kids for 5 days a week, for 40 hours a week. And they're just, okay, so the school, they know how to educate. That's their job. But what they're doing, like Andy said, is that it's indoctrination. It's not education. They're not just focusing on the 3 R's. They're focusing on all of these other things that, honestly, If you're religious, that's the church's responsibility. That's your responsibility as parents. And you as parents know best to raise your kids. And the fact that educators and school boards and politicians are coming out and trying to take that power away from parents, I feel like I'm just seeing history from the early 20th century in Eastern Europe repeat itself. The Prussians and the Germans. And this is what they do. They take the parents' ownership and their ability to sort of rear their own children away from them. And
Right.
it's indoctrination. And I am so upset over it. I get really angry.
In a certain way, the schools do teach the 3 R's: racism, racism, and racism.
It's
That's
true.
what they're concerned to indoctrinate the kids with, that, and the faculty. And this is what they focus on. Not that they don't care about education. If they cared about education, the kids would come out of high school knowing how to read and write and knowing something about history. But many of them do not. And the standardized tests show that. So yeah, you're right. This is pure Marxism. The Marxists control the intellectual culture, and like I said, they'll fight to the death to retain their power to indoctrinate kids with this communist propaganda. And this is why they want. You're right. The most evil thing I could think of is telling parents, you don't control the education of your children. The state does. That's pure National Socialism, fascism, communism. That's what they want. It's a totalitarian state. That's where they're pushing us. It's horrible. And you're right to be angry about it.
So, Andy, give us a little bit of hope. Is the private school any better? Are private schools any kind of alternative?
In the past, because I've been teaching at the college level for 40 years now, shows you how old I am. In the past, I could see the difference between the kids that went to private schools, including the Catholic schools. I'm in the New York area. So a lot of Catholics, living in this area, a lot of them send their kids to Catholic school. Today, yeah, a little bit. Educationally, I don't know that it's that much different, but I think the Catholic school kids are less indoctrinated with leftist propaganda than the kids that go to the government schools and or to the secular private schools. I think they're dumbing down state requirements, are dumbing down the private schools. I don't think the private schools are that much of an advantage anymore. I think the secular private schools are probably just as bad, if not worse, regarding indoctrination than the government schools are. The religious private schools may be slightly less bad in that way, but they get indoctrinated with religious ideology, but not as much with leftist ideology, which I think is a lot worse.
I don't know about, yeah, just to jump in, at least on the West Coast, and we were on opposite coasts and in our teaching experience. I know first, secondhand because it was a friend, but a friend's daughter that I know, she was in a Catholic school and they were very devout Catholics, and they had to do volunteer, community service, which is fine. That's great, and she wanted to volunteer at her local Catholic church, working with the kids and youth groups and things. And the Catholic school told her that, no, those kids aren't in need. We're going to send you over here to this this place. It wasn't a homeless shelter, but it was a place where they would distribute things in need for the homeless. So she was told to distribute, in addition to other things, I think it was something for the homeless, not at a school, but they had her distributing condoms, which goes against her religion. And that's where the school sent her. So I don't think even the religious public schools, they're also getting to be very, very left and very sort of woke. A lot of things about diversity, and she, even taking some of the religious parts out of the school in favor of some of these things. And again, this is in the Pacific Northwest. So education is so regional, and it's going to be better in certain places and worse in certain places. And I think the cities are the absolute worst places for education, whether it's public, private, religious, secular. The cities are the worst.
I think you're right. And you're right about the Catholic schools moving left and becoming more woke. There's no question about it. Many of my students who are Catholic school graduates are hardcore Republicans, Trump supporters, but I think that may come more from their families than from than any sympathetic, any sympathetic teachings in that area in the Catholic schools.
Yeah, the Jesuits used to have some of the best schools all the way through college, and I just don't see that anymore.
And what we all have to understand is that when modern schools do their hiring, as they try to fill out their staffing, where do they look? They have to typically find them from the teachers' colleges. Now, it used to be that teachers could get hired for their knowledge of a subject and their teaching ability, and they wouldn't have needed to be credentialed for it. But that's changed, and there's kind of a CYA approach to hiring practices, even at the private level, where the credential protects you from repercussions. You can always say that this person has a degree from this graduate school, and that covers you. But what you're getting is the homogeneity of the ideology, which is now predominantly Marxist, and that's why the quality of the private schools have gone down. So private schools by themselves in a vacuum are not necessarily an alternative here, and in fact, they can be just as bad as the public schools. So it's incumbent on all parents to really look into it. And it may be possible that private schools are not going to be a fit for where you want to take your child. So now let's talk about.
Yeah, let me say something about that, Joe. I think the elite private schools, the Ivy League kind of schools you see on the East Coast, Phillips Exeter and Andover and Choate, and in places like that. I think a lot of their teachers still have degrees in their subject, bachelor's, master's, even PhDs in their subject rather than in education. And they teach academic subjects. I think their academics at those elite schools are much better. The politics is probably just as woke or becoming as woke as in the other schools. But these are schools that are very expensive. And for top students, scholarships for poorer kids, who are top students. But these are the elite schools. Academically, I think they still take some pride in teaching, real subjects to the kids. They see themselves as training society's future leaders.
Yeah, absolutely. And, private schools have a little more leeway. A public school, you have to hire a credentialed teacher. So I have a master's in history. I have a master's in anthropology. If I wanted to go teach public school, and actually I have a doctorate in education, if I wanted to go teach, say, public middle school, and I wanted to teach history, I would have to go back to school and get my credential, even though I have all of this education. And so it's really interesting. Private schools have a lot more leeway. I could go in and teach history at a private school without that credential, although some of them, and again, it's very regional, and some of it, if it's if they have, like, each Catholic school, each area has its own sort of overarching district, so to speak, and they may require credentials. So again, it's very regional, but private schools do have a little more leeway. So there are pockets that are still going to be good. If you and then we haven't even talked about charter schools. And in some places, charter schools are really good schools. They tend to focus on something, whether it's STEM or the arts or something else. And there may be a really good charter school that's really focused on an aspect of education, and maybe your kid is really good in computer science and he wants to go into the technical charter school. It may still be good. So it's but what the main takeaway here, I think, for parents is you have to do your homework. You need to do your due diligence. You need to ask questions. You need to find out what curriculum, aside from the regular curriculum, what are you teaching? What math book are you using? Because there are math books for elementary school called social justice math, and they are being taught. And so it's so it's in everywhere. They can sneak it in. Oh no, we're just teaching math, but you have to find out what textbook they're using. Are they teaching Howard Zinn for history? Because that is revisionism. And that's, from a very particular lens. And so it takes, a lot of research, or at least, maybe knowing some people that are well-versed in education, listening to our podcast, we can help parents out with these things and the questions and sort of these red flags to look for. If you're really worried about any sort of ideology sneaking into the education, because that's everywhere.
Okay, so if, and again, because this is going to be a regional and local thing, maybe you've discovered that the private schools in your area are not going to be a good fit for what you want your child to experience. So what are the non-school approaches, the let's call them traditional schools, although I hate that term because the really traditional schools are really what we are about to talk about, which is the homeschool alternative. So let's talk about that. What are some of the things that you would like to look at if you're a parent trying to decide whether this is the right alternative for you?
I'm a huge homeschool advocate, just as a sort of disclaimer. A few things that I always hear about issues or reservations people have about homeschool. One, I'm not smart enough to teach your kid. That's not a problem, because there's so many resources out there. You don't have to be an expert in everything. You just have to be able to facilitate. Easy peasy.
You couldn't possibly do worse than the government schools are doing right now.
And that's always my opinion too, Andy. It's like you cannot do worse. You cannot mess up your kid worse than what's already happening. Two, you don't have the time. Well, when you're teaching, okay, so this is a pretty convoluted answer, but time is really interesting because we're used to the kids being away for 6 to 8 hours a day. It doesn't take 6 to 8 hours a day for one kid to master a subject, or even if you have 3 kids, it doesn't take that long, because when you have a room of 30 students and they're all at different levels, it takes longer to teach a particular topic or a subject. Also, the school, it is a big money business, right? And so they figure that you've got to keep your kids longer. The school day keeps on getting longer and longer, and those full-time equivalency hours keep getting longer and longer. And I think it's because they have to justify how much money they're getting. And so you don't need 6-8 hours a day. You can get all your subjects done in about an hour and a half to 2 hours a day, and your student is going to be so much more ahead of his peers that are in public school. So you don't need all of that time. And then you're like, well, I have to work full time, both parents, or I'm a single parent, I have to work. There are other alternatives. There are co-ops. There are even parents have gotten together and say, I'm an engineer, I'm good at math or whatever. And so there are ways to do it, even if you're working full time. I've heard of parents that homeschool in the evening for an hour or two, and then they spend some time on the weekend because they're working full time. So it's really, really manageable. And I've done seminars and webinars on helping parents make that leap and sort of ease anxiety. And I think it's just the unknown, that anxiety is one of the big things. And then another thing I keep hearing is, but what about the socialization? They're going to be really weird and they're not going to know how to interact with other humans. That is the biggest farce. All the homeschool kids that I've met in the last 10 years have been more well-adjusted, well-mannered, can talk to adults. They're not isolated by peer groups, so they only know how to talk to kids their own age. They are around people of all ages, little kids, older, people, parents. So they are very, very well adjusted. They're curious about the world. They're interested. They want to talk to you. They want to learn. And it is like night and day talking to a kid that comes out of public school versus a homeschool kid these days.
Yeah, it's like the only place kids make friends and get to socialize is in school. What universe do these people live in? But anyhow, I want to make a couple of prior points before I answer your question, Joel. First of all, I like, Dr. Deanna, who is doctorate in education, so she's really expert in this. I like calling you Doc D, like there was Doc Ock in Spider-Man, and but because he was a super villain, but you're a super heroine cleaning up the the cesspool of contemporary education.
Thank you.
So yeah, oh yeah. So I like doing this with Doc D. But also, I just want to go back to an earlier question, Joel, about trying to make internal changes. I think E.D. Hirsch is right in his book, The Schools We Need and Why We Don't Have Them. He called it an impregnable fortress, and I do. The impregnable fortress of contemporary education, the schools of education, the state departments of education, the federal departments of education, the government school system, and so forth. It is an impregnable fortress. They're impervious to criticism. I mean, my God, as far back as 1983, in a nation at risk, which was composed at a cabinet level, right? President Reagan's Secretary of Education said the words to the effect that if a foreign nation had imposed these type of education on us, we would have considered it an act of war. I mean, you can't. First of all, you can't speak in language any stronger than that. Second of all, that was a cabinet level, position. Third of all, that's 1983. It's 38 years ago. What's happened in the interlocking directorate, as Arthur Bester called it, or the impregnable fortress, as E.D. Hirsch termed it? Nothing. If anything, they've gotten worse. They are impervious to criticism. So we have to we can't change the impregnable fortress. We have to circumvent it. And I think Dr. Deanna, I think, has given us some really good points. There's a lot of homeschool parents who are not professional teachers. Some are, many are not. But their kids score well on standardized tests, much better than government school kids generally do. Mm-hmm. And there's homeschooling co-ops, and like you said, there's homeschooling networks where they get together with other families and other kids, and the kids have plenty of opportunities to socialize. Even aside from the fact that, for me, I grew up in Brooklyn. There were 10,000 kids just on my parents' block. But, for people who live in more, so people who live in urban communities, that's not a problem. There's plenty of kids and families that you interact with every day, or even if you live in a town or a village, there's other people there. If you're in a really rural area, then it's more of a question. But there's all these activities, Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts and Little League, and you go into the nearest town, and there's dance, there's schools for dance and gymnastics, and churches have basketball leagues and stuff, and church is a big social organization in more rural areas. This idea that we don't get socialized unless we're in a school setting it's just false. And to answer your question, Joe, one thing I wanted to point out that homeschool parents are doing, and I think is a really good trend, is hiring tutors. Because I'm a tutor, and I know Doc D is a tutor. I won't mention names, but there's a family in Minnesota hired me to teach their kids literature and then philosophy, and they pay me X amount an hour. It's not an enormous amount, but I could see how it could add up. But the thing about tutors, a couple of points. First of all, the technology is great. So if you don't have somebody in your area, you might live in Minnesota and find somebody in Arizona, and you could do it via Zoom or some alternative like that. But also, here's what I'm talking about, in my book on education. In grad school, there's a lot of young, 20-year-old students who are getting masters and or PhDs in real subjects. They're getting, advanced degrees in chemistry or mathematics or history or literature, and not in education. And they have a bachelor's degree in a real subject. So they're already much more knowledgeable than the high school teachers, and certainly much more than the elementary school teachers. And they're grad students. They don't have full-time jobs. They don't have a lot of money. You can get them relatively inexpensively, and they know much more about their subject than the government school teachers. You can get them relatively inexpensive. It's good for them because it goes on their resume. It's maybe their first teaching experience. They don't have to they could do it in their living room or in their dorm room, whatever. They don't have to do what I did when I was in grad school, driving around from one college to another, trying to make a living. They could do this from their dorm room, and they can make money in their expertise. You might be able to hire them for $50 an hour. It's somebody who really knows their subject. And Doc D, see if you agree with this or not, because I've never gone through a teaching program. But from what I could tell, the teaching programs are often so horrible that they very well might knock out of a future teacher any real teaching ability.
It's true. Yeah, that's a good point.
So if you got some guy or some man or woman getting a PhD in chemistry, and you hire them to teach, science to your kids, their teaching abilities, their abilities to communicate their knowledge effectively may be better than, haven't had that knocked out of them by going through a teaching program. So I think hiring tutors is a definite alternative for parents, certainly as a supplement to homeschooling.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, and I've done that. I worked with a student. He was homeschooled. He was in high school. He had a calculus teacher, a tutor for calculus. I tutored him in literature and philosophy, and history. And then he had a violin teacher. And so by the time he got up to high school, his parents, they needed to have a little extra help. And that could be on any level. Right now I'm tutoring a kid in 7th grade. I've tutored kids in 2nd grade. And so, you can find supplemental sort of education. And, a lot of people are like, well, I have a 6-year-old and I have to work all day. What am I going to do with that 6-year-old all day? And there are, issues, but then that's kind of when you come into this idea that, you can find, maybe you have family, or maybe there's another homeschool family and you can work with them. And back to your idea of community, what's really interesting is that there are now homeschool band. So you can join band with a whole bunch of other homeschool kids. There are meetup groups all over Facebook. All you have to do is type in your neighborhood or your city and just look for homeschool meetup. And there are tons and tons of meetups. So they just schedule like in the park on a Tuesday, or they have a museum day, or they do a field trip day to the local zoo or something. And so, and then also institutions, museums, zoos, aquariums, pretty much anything, historic sites, they have special homeschool days and special homeschool programming. So it's this whole idea of homeschool is no longer, that's what weird people do, or that's what the religious zealots do. It is becoming much more of a norm and accepted, particularly in this era of of COVID, with all the issues with schooling. So many families took their kids out of school, and they had these little pods where they would pool money together with other families, and then they would hire a teacher on their own. And so there are just so many options. In addition, there are so many free resources and low cost resources online that you can get. You can get entire curriculum packets, religious, secular, like pretty much anything. You can have your kid wants to learn how to play the drums. There are entire YouTube channels that are devoted to that. So, with technology, it is so much easier to make that transition. And it's just the idea of getting over whatever anxieties the parents have. And that's one thing I really want to help as many parents do. And so, maybe I'll start doing my free webinars again, because it really, I think, the more parents that can see that it's really something that is doable, and it doesn't have to be scary. You don't have to be, a credentialed teacher. Even if you didn't go to college, you can still homeschool your students. And I guarantee that they're going to get a better education, because you are going to be more invested than those teachers are.
I can see the advertising campaign. You want to tutor your kids. Who are you going to call? Doc D. I could see it. But let me point out a couple of things, combining the old and the new, because I think you're absolutely right, Deanna. Did I mention my mom on the show last week? Because she didn't graduate high school, and she wasn't the brightest bulb on the tree but she was, she wasn't unintelligent either. But she did something that back then, for my sisters and I think was fairly common amongst parents. Use flashcards, to teach us the alphabet and the multiplication table and stuff like that. And so by the time we went into kindergarten, we already, had some level of knowledge. Now, I was talking just the other day you guys might know Mike Gustafson, who he was a he's a young guy, early 30s. He was a public school teacher, elementary school teacher. After a number of years, left the elementary school, he and his wife started their own school in Massachusetts, Atlas Academy. And because he has a teaching degree and his wife might have one also, I'm not sure. The state government of Massachusetts didn't give them a lot of hassles about starting, a small private school, which I think, we could talk about a little bit more. But he made the point to me that, what parents need to do and they can do at ages 3 or 4 is systematic phonics. With at a very early age, you don't have to teach the kids the letters. He was telling me just the sounds that the letters make at an even earlier age that I was taught. Age 3 and 4. He was saying, I think all parents can do this and should do it, because reading, to me, is the single most important educational skill, the single most important intellectual skill. And it's not that difficult. And we discussed that last week, right? You motivate the kids by showing them, letting them pick out books at a very early age when they're 1 or 2, that looks like fun to them, and you read it to them, and the kid learns, oh, books are fun. I want to learn how to Read. And then Mike Gustafson was saying, at age 3 and 4, you teach them, all the sounds that the letters make. And by the time they're 4 or 5, they could be reading effectively. And then the whole world of knowledge is open to them. So a lot of parents already do that. I think a lot of, like that character in Moliere's play that was speaking prose without realizing it.
Right.
A lot of parents are already homeschooling without realizing it. They're doing this preschool work with their kids. They're doing after school work with their kids, helping them with their homework and helping them with their reading and stuff. And that could be expanded. The preschool, the after school, like you were saying, Deanna, come home from work, either parent, or if there's only one parent, an hour a night, and then more hours on the weekend of intense study, for a couple of hours. Kids don't need to be in school for 8 hours.
No,
to get an education.
It's really not necessary.
No, and I don't think they need to do a lot of homework either. I think Maria Montessori talked about that. If I was running a school, the only homework I would have would be for literature class. We're going to read Macbeth starting November 12th. You got to have Macbeth read by then. Other than that, there'd be no homework. We do intense bouts of study in school, and the kids are motivated because they know after school's over, the day is theirs.
Yeah, I think the most pernicious thing that our modern education has given us is the belief that the teachers are, the teachers within the school system are the gods who you must delegate authority to. And the parents have, for the most part in the 20th century and the 21st century, have done that and don't realize the kind of effect that they can have on their own kids' education by their own power. And all it takes is just the belief that you can actually do it. And what we see from the parents that we've talked to, a lot of the homeschoolers that we've gotten to know over the years, is that, homeschooling is something that that a lot of parents and families have tried, and some give up and say it's not for them. And the truth is, it's not for them necessarily because the child isn't into it. It's because the parents have still believe that they need to delegate that authority. And all you need is the belief that you can do it. And sometimes it just takes a couple baby steps to realize that it's possible. So, and it may be something as simple as seeing or hearing someone else's experience, someone you know, or just knowing that there's a world of resources out there for you. So to wrap this up, what are some things that you can say to parents who are considering the homeschool option? What's a good resource that they can go to, or a book that they can read, or some words of wisdom that can help them make that start? So let's start with Deanna.
So I keep thinking of this analogy. When I first started my anthropology program, I was going for archaeology. And I remember before I even had my first archaeology class, I went up to my professor and I said, I'm really nervous about doing this because how do you find a site? Like how do you know what to do? And I had all of this anxiety. And he's like, don't worry about it. We're going to teach you that. There are ways, there are methods, and you're going to learn those things, and it's okay. Don't get ahead of yourself. And that's sort of the same thing with parents with homeschooling, is that don't think of all of the stuff. Just, take a deep breath and realize, okay, there are resources, and there are free resources on the internet. So the first thing that I would say is go to the Homeschool Legal Defense Association, HSD.
Seconded.
And we'll put the link in the description below. And so go there. They have a lot of information. They're not a perfect organization, but they're going to tell you who's in charge of your homeschool for your state. What are the legalese? In New York, it is very, very strict and it is very regulated. In other states, it is, I'm going to homeschool my kid. Great, have a good time. In New York, you've got to file curriculum, and every state has their different thing. Again, education left to the states, that goes back to our founding. And so that's the same thing with homeschool. So go to the HSLDA and find out what you need for your state. That's the first step you can do. And then just Google homeschool curriculum, and you will be overwhelmed with how much is out there and how much is free. So you're like, I have to teach my kid fractions. I don't even know, I can't even do fractions anymore. I've forgotten. Well, you know what? That's okay, because you're going to find free worksheets online on how to teach your kid fractions. And math, like a lot of other things, reading, phonics, a lot of it is just repetition. You're going to just give them problem sets, give them problem sets, give them problem sets, and they're going to learn that way by repetition. And it's going to sort of be ingrained. Multiplication tables, same thing. And so math tends to be the biggest anxiety from what I've seen for parents. And so just, that initial take a deep breath, HSLDA, and then go from there. Checklists, all sorts of things. And if I decide to start doing webinars again, I've got checklists and all sorts of things. We'll definitely let you know on the podcast, and we'll have links and stuff for that as well.
Great.
Andy, how about you?
Well, one thing the parents could do right from the start that will make them better than the school system is if they're determined to teach the kids academic subjects, because the schools don't want the kids to learn academic subjects. And they say it in so many words. They're teaching them social skills, practical skills, vocational training and stuff. Academics aren't for most people. That goes all the way back to Dewey and William Hurt Kilpatrick 100 years ago. And it's still that way. They don't teach nearly enough, which is, it's no mystery why American kids score so low on international tests on academic subjects, because the schools don't teach academic subjects to the depth or the extent that the schools in other countries do. So parents make up their mind they're going to teach the kids history. Wow, what a concept. My kid's got to learn history, because in most cases in the government schools, he will not. And similarly with reading, writing, arithmetic, science and so forth. So that decision right at the start that I'm going to teach my children academics so they have a really good education already puts you ahead of the school system. And then, there's like Doc D was saying, there's all these tools. Hooked on Phonics is a really good resource. It's not that expensive, and they have all kinds of toys and games and workbooks and stuff that help kids learn phonics, which is the only method historically tried, a true method to teach reading. And then there's all these beginner kind of books, the For Dummies series and stuff.
Yeah.
You can read Math for Dummies. I have one because I was never a good math student, and I have one of those beginning math books called Kiss My Math by I think Danica McKellar, I think is the author. There's all these simple books, to bring back to you all of your, if you actually studied math in elementary school, it brings all of that back. So you're right, Doc D. There's so many different resources for parents. As just one last point I want to make, and that is, in the government schools and in the private schools, there are still some very dedicated classroom teachers Right?
Mhm.
You know, people who go into that profession because they think they have this funny idea that kids should learn, to read and write and, learn history and everything. And they're stifled, certainly in the government school system. I think some of them are, as fed up as the parents are, and and maybe willing to quit. And I think you might be able to find professional teachers. I mean, you could start your own small community school. And like Mike Gustafson said, it's easier, New York, I'm in New York, so I know it's, the people, Pronies, the People's Republic in New York. So I know the kind of hoops they make you jump through. In redneck places, it's much less bad. But I think Mike Gustafson is generally right that if you have a certified teacher to start a school, rather than parents who are, doctors or engineers or bricklayers or gardeners or what have you, that the state makes you. Massachusetts, Mike said it was very simple for him as a certified teacher to start his own school. I suspect that's generally true. Get a fed up teacher who actually wants to teach. Like Marva Collins started, right? She walked away from the government schools and started her own school in the basement of a university, and then in her own apartment. You could start. You have one teacher and 5 or 10 families who've had it up to here, and obviously there are many people left. You could start a small community school, and keep it small with a teacher who really cares about education. The parents, I think, Joel, you were saying homeschool co-ops. You have parents. My dad's an engineer. He could teach math and a lot of science. My mom's an MD or a nurse. She took all these bio and AP, anatomy and physiology courses. She could teach biology. There's a lot of parents who have expertise, in these subjects who could teach in homeschool co-ops or small community schools that you start. More hoops to jump through if you're not a certified teacher, but it can still be done, especially if you're outside of New York. So there's a lot of options, for parents today, but they need to realize I have the moral authority to educate my children as I see fit. The government has usurped that. They have no business doing so. Terry McAuliffe is 100% wrong. The proper attitude is parents must control education 100%, and then they hire teachers, tutors, schools because they're the experts. But the teachers, tutors, and schools are the hired help. Just like if I want work done on my house, I hire a contractor. I tell a contractor, I want you to build a soundproof basement. I want you to knock down the wall between the living room and dining room, and connect that. I want to add on, near the garage. This is what is going to be done. You're the expert. Tell me how you're going to do it. Similarly, parents hire teachers, tutors, schools. They have the power. My kid's going to learn reading by phonics. We're going to do a lot of writing. You're going to teach my kid history, not social studies. And so you can teach real academic subjects. Now you're the experts, so you go ahead and do it. But the parents have the power, not the government, not the schools, not even the teachers. The parents have the power. And me, as a tutor, I'm the hired help. I teach their kids what they want me to teach their kids. And then parents need to realize that, one, they have the power, the moral authority, and two, they're going to teach the kids academics. They're already well beyond what the government schools are, and they'll do better. At the very least, they'll do better than the government schools. I know that's a very low bar, but still they could do a lot better than the government schools.
One other thing that I was thinking about while Andy was talking and about how parents have this power is that you don't have to sit at a desk or the dining room table every day and do a lesson, both sitting down, like that idea of teacher student. Everything, the world is a classroom when you homeschool. So your kids are like wiggly and they just need to be outside to get rid of some energy. So you know what? We're going to do botany today. And we're going to go out with our little field guide and we're going to identify all the plants in our yard. We're going to look at insects. We're going to understand them. So that's, biology. We're going to go to the zoo, or we're going to go to an art museum and we're going to learn about painting. So everything is a classroom. So you don't, it's just a total shift of mindset of what education is when you homeschool. You're teaching fractions and there's a meltdown. You're like, okay, we're going to stop right now. Let's bake cookies. You know what? Baking is all about fractions. So we need 1/4 of a teaspoon. So what fraction of 1 is that? So those sorts of things. And so the world is the oyster, so to speak, for education when you homeschool. And I just think that is such a beautiful thing and it gets you more connected with your kids. You're gonna have a stronger relationship. The kids are gonna be more well adjusted. I mean, I can't scream from enough rooftops on all of this stuff. So I really hope that we've at least helped one parent, maybe more, take that leap and just say, okay, I'm gonna try it. And I'm gonna, give it more than a week. It's gonna take time. It's gonna take at least a couple of months for that adjustment period. And then, keep going, just keep going, because you're doing a million times better. As Andy said, you're already better off.
The mindset that you're the one responsible for your child's education can seem like a burden, especially if we're used to delegating that. And if you realize that it is your responsibility, that can also be incredibly empowering too. So if you think that you can go to your school board meeting and change minds and actually make a real substantive change that will affect your children in their lifetimes, that's a tough nut to crack. And if you take your kid out of that school system, you're going to hit that system in more ways than you might imagine. The school system is funded by head count. You take your kid out of school, they lose money. Your first motivation here is to help your own child. But when you realize that by taking your child out of the system and saving them, you may be saving the culture at large by accelerating the demise of the public schools.
Right, you can starve the government monster. I know we're running out of time, so I just wanted to make one last point that I think is really important. A reason a lot of homeschooling parents give for why they homeschool is safety. The government schools, especially in urban areas, you deal with bullies and crime, drugs, not just in urban areas, maybe even more in the suburban areas where the kids have money. I mean, my daughter went to a real ritzy top suburban high school, a really good kid. And she told me, Dad, she said, so many young kids that you're 15 years old, they're drinking and using all kinds of drugs and everything. And understandably, parents don't want their children subjected to that, the possibility of school invasion. But crime, bullies, and drugs are prevalent in a lot of the big government schools, not just in urban areas. And so safety, you have your kids at home and/or in a homeschool co-op and/or in a small community school in some parents' basement, and it's that's an important consideration for a lot of parents, and understandably so. The government schools are bad in so many ways. They don't educate, they indoctrinate, and they expose the kids to a lot of dangers.
That's a really good point, Andy. And also, Joel, it's called a FTE, a full-time equivalency. And they always say, if you want to make change, then hit them in the pocketbook. And that's a point that if you really, really are angry at the system, pull your kid out. And each district and they have different ways that, if you pull them out within the first couple months, they'll lose funding for the full year. Or if you pull them out in February, they'll lose funding from that month forward. But it really does make a difference. During COVID, I know some school districts got approval to use numbers from pre-COVID. So they skirted that issue because so many kids were pulled out of school. But if you want to get the system kind of, hit them, that's where you're going to do it, is funding. Even on the college level, everything is funded by full-time equivalency. And so when enrollments are down, things get cut because the college doesn't get as much money. That trickles all the way down to elementary school. Even preschools that are state funded are all about enrollment. So that's a really, really good point, Joel.
Well, I hope we have given parents that are listening to this a little bit of inspiration and maybe some knowledge on what steps to take next. But we are going to continue hammering this in each episode. So I hope you all get a chance to tune in to our next episode. But for now, we'll say goodbye to our esteemed panel, Doctors Deanna and Andy. Thanks for being on the show.
Well, thanks for doing this, Joe, and Dr. Deanna. Always great talking to you, and I look forward to the next episode of The Rational Educator.
Thanks for listening to the Rational Educator podcast. Don't forget to like and share this episode because it really helps us grow. And let us know what you think by emailing us at info@rationaleducator.com. We'll see you next time.